Welcome to The Real Baltimore. I'm Eze Jackson. For decades, Baltimore has been one of the most violent cities in the country. And during that time, politicians have chosen the same method to stop it, policing. But recently, a group of residents decided to take a different path. It was called the Baltimore Ceasefire, a weekend where organizers sought peace on the streets for 72 hours. Despite a 41-hour stretch without a killing, 2 murders occurred late Saturday. But the supporters of the ceasefire say they will not be deterred. In fact, they are now calling for year-round efforts to address the root causes of violence like poverty, racism, and isolation. Joining me to discuss how this movement will grow in the future are several people involved in organizing and supporting the Baltimore ceasefire. Erricka Bridgeford is the founder of the ceasefire movement here and the director of training for Community Mediation Maryland. Councilman Kris Burnett represents Baltimore's 8th District on the West Side. He's also a member of the Public Safety Committee, which just released the Live to Be More crime plan. Kevin McCamant is a former prison psychologist who recently fasted for over 22 days to stop violence in Baltimore. But first, we have a package from our reporter, Taya Graham.
It was a meditative pause for a city plagued by violence. Day 2 of a citywide call for a 72-hour ceasefire that so far has yielded positive results.
We figured out yesterday that 7 o'clock, so LNG was like, 7 o'clock is the magic number. That's 19 hours. So if we get to 7:01, something shifted in Baltimore today. So when it was 8 o'clock, I said, are we about to have 24 hours of nobody getting killed in Baltimore? And so when it was 10 o'clock, we were like, please, everybody just stay calm, But I think that's the thing, right? It's spiritual science, I think, that's happening right now because there are so many people whose group consciousness, we're all thinking the same thing.
Here, supporters of the efforts to stop murder silently walked the labyrinth next to the YMCA near Charles Village. The difference between this movement and City Hall's recent attempts to quell murders through tougher laws was this: engaging the spirit.
You can't lock up folks. You can't just throw people away. It's a time for all of us to come together and be involved and find out what's going on in our communities and really talk to people, engage in a real conversation on what we need to do going forward.
Many who had gathered had suffered violence, but had learned through experience that its source is the pain of poverty and racial isolation.
I think the thing with this is just connecting, and as the song and the anthem, one of the songs that's connected to the ceasefire event says, lift your vibrations higher. I think it's just an effort to become in tune with a higher vibration by concentrating on what's inside of you and also working to bring that and put that positivity out into the atmosphere.
A recognition among the people that only patience and giving can heal what ails us. This is Taya Graham and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland.
All right, thanks for coming to the show, y'all. Erricka, I want to start with you. We've spoken a lot over the course of the past month or so about the ceasefire. And right after, literally the day after ceasefire weekend, you started doing something interesting. That was every time a murder happened, you now post something about them, who they are, and you kind of require people to take a moment and reflect on that. I want to read this one you posted last night.
Okay.
You said, "Dear Baltimore family, we lost our brother today. T. Roy is 23 years old, and not long after 12:30 p.m., he died from gunshot wounds. This breaks our heart. It knocks the wind out of us, realizing that T. Roy was taken so abruptly. It stops us in our tracks. We have to pause. We can't go about whatever we were doing without pausing and feeling. We just can't. Rest in peace, Troy. Hashtag vibrate even higher. Hashtag don't be numb." What made you start doing that?
So when my brother was murdered in 2007, it was the first time that it dawned on me how unfair it was that I went outside and the world just kept going. People were still going to work and to the store and looking at me going, hey, how you doing today? And that question never landed the same again because I wasn't doing good for a very long time. And so and that was something that stayed with me. Like every time somebody got murdered after that, I just noticed like only for the loved ones did it just like stop your life. And so all of Baltimore went through that during the ceasefire weekend. At that 41st hour, we didn't even know Lamontre's name, but we were just devastated, and everybody like that could stop whatever celebration they were attending and just came over to that spot together to go, what? You know, like we let it knock the wind out of us. And I had to be honest in realizing that 2 weeks before the ceasefire, that's not what I did when I found out somebody got killed, unless it was somebody that I knew. I did know people who have recently been murdered, and it did that for me. But in between, when it was people who I had never met before, I didn't feel it in that same way. And when I had been asked recently, was I numb to the amount of murders in Baltimore, I was offended, and I said, no, I'm not numb. You see me out here doing this work all the time. And so how we felt during that 5 hours in the ceasefire when we lost 2 people, we were aware that we lost 2 people. It wasn't just those families. It was all of us because we were looking for it. And so for my own personal growth and my own personal walk and my talk and not letting the numbness set in anymore, I needed to be able to give that life exactly what I wanted for my brother's life, for people to recognize and just stop whatever you are doing and say, no, the world shouldn't just keep going forward the way it was before because we have lost somebody.
Yeah, we definitely learned over the ceasefire weekend, I think, how desensitized we are around murder.
Yeah.
You know, when people die, especially, you know, just seeing it as a report, you know, but those posts definitely make it close to home, you know, for everybody. Councilman Burnett, you all, I think the first day of the ceasefire, released a plan called Live to Be More Plan.
Yes.
You, yourself, Brandon Scott, several other council members came up with a plan to address the violence in Baltimore. Can you tell me about this plan and how this plan is different from other plans that the city has put forth?
So first, thank you for having us.
Oh, yeah, thanks for
having
coming in.
all of us on here to tell these stories. So the plan really focuses on trying to get to the root causes of violence and not focus completely on policing, which do play a role, but not the role. And for a long time, the strategies that have been implemented by city government have focused on mass incarceration, have focused on resources for policing. We've spent billions of dollars on policing over the last 10 years and have not seen a reduction in violence. And myself and my colleagues under the leadership of Councilman Scott, who chairs the Public Safety Committee, worked together to put together a plan that would really focus more on a holistic perspective on violence reduction that really hits on a few areas, but all kind of rooted in looking at violence as a public health crisis and not a policing crisis. And so it's 5 areas that we focus on, being preventative, so focusing on education, pushing for the community schools model, trauma-informed care, mentorship, reading proficiency, reducing chronic absenteeism, as things that we know if we reach young people at an early age and see the symptoms of violence early and treat them early, which we know are kind of rooted in education and rooted in economics and also rooted in trauma, right? We talked about the neighborhoods that our young people are growing up in. They experience trauma at a young age, and then they go into the school building with that, carrying that baggage, and it prevents them from being educated, from wanting to be, you know, active in school and participation in activities and in after school time programs. And I think as a city, we have to really focus on rebuilding the whole person and rebuilding the whole family and making preventative efforts to move. And I know we'll talk about it a little bit later, but, you know, this effort around mandatory minimums, I think, is kind of moving backwards in that sense because it's really kind of focusing on mass incarceration and not the real reasons why people commit acts of violence among each other. We also focus on expanding safe streets. So we look at, you know, it's stop shooting, start living, and expanding the safe streets model, which folks know we you use people who've come from that life, who've returned from incarceration, and have used them to do direct outreach, to do community mediation, literally on the block in the neighborhoods that they live in, which is an evidence-based model that is run by the health department and run by health departments all over the country, and has proven to reduce violence. And looking not only to expand it into other neighborhoods, but I'd like to see alternatives. So in Philadelphia, for example, their Safe Streets programs goes into the prison system and recruits Safe Streets outreach workers who are from men who are going to be coming back, and trying to reach them early so that, one, they have a job opportunity when they come out, and two, that they're coming back with into the neighborhoods that they left, but with a different perspective, and to carry that credibility, right? It's different when me as an elected official is walking down a block trying to talk to guys on the corner than someone who's been in that life or lives in that neighborhood and can connect with them in a different way. Not that folks don't like seeing me out there, because they say elected officials do need to get out there, but it's still a different conversation. Yeah. And I'm not a trained mediator, which is also another piece. I need to get that
we
squared away.
We will get you in training.
Yeah.
There you go.
The other couple pieces, and I move quick because I know we're short on time, but we focus on jobs and workforce training programs. So we want to expand the youth opportunity centers. We only have 2 of them right now, but they focus on workforce training, GED, job readiness, those soft skills and hard skills that our young people need to going into the employment, and expanding YouthWorks, right, which is a 5-week youth summer jobs program we have in Baltimore. I'd like to see it year-round. It's always about funding and money, but this year, and this isn't mentioned in the plan, but myself, Councilman Cohen, and Councilwoman Sneed put together a pilot program where we took 30 students and really did some workforce training as a part of their experience in our YouthWorks sites. So Fridays, they weren't working, they were learning everything they needed to know about working a job, showing up on time, how to dress, all those things that, if you teach a young person at an early age, they carry that to the rest of their life, but also making sure that they had meaningful experiences. So my youth worker said she wants to run for office one day, and I'm like, well, good. So let me show you how I operate. So I had her out there on the block with me, reporting vacant houses, taking her to illegal dumping sites and showing how 311 operates, and taking her into hearings with me and helping explaining to her the policy process so she understood it a little bit better. But also having her plan events and things in my district. So I have a district event coming up this weekend, and she did all the work for that.
Yes.
She got a better job now,
yes.
so she's going to come by. But trying to make sure that it's not just you're filing paperwork, you're answering phones, but that you actually get an experience that helps develop and grow our young people. And we were pushing all of the YouthWorks sites that had this small cohort of students to do just that. And the idea is that we'll use this as a way to kind of grow out the YouthWorks program so that it's more meaningful for our kids. The last 2 pieces focus on neighborhoods, making sure we're investing in community-led programs like Baltimore Ceasefire, helping build capacity, which is a huge issue there's a lot of neighborhood-based, community-based organizations that operate, but they're really small oftentimes, and they don't have the capacity to grow. They don't have grant writers to help them raise the money, or their networks and social capital or real capital to really expand their operations. So, and those are the best programs, right? Because if I'm working with a community-based organization that's working in the community and is led by the community, anything that they implement is going to be specific to the direct needs of that neighborhood. And so those are the kind of things that I think move the city forward when we talk about rebuilding communities and rebuilding neighborhoods. So really building capacity and investment. And the last piece is, like I said, police do play a role, but we know a lot of our officers don't come from or live in Baltimore. And so there's a cultural competency gap, and there's a training gap that exists for a lot of our officers, that they're not trained in mediation, they're not trained in de-escalation techniques or really understanding the history of the city. I know that the commissioner has made that a requirement for incoming officers as a part of their training, but I'd like to see, and I know we'd like to see, all officers go through a retraining and constant retraining process and how to interact with the community and focus really on community policing strategy, but also rebuilding relationships and trust, because that's really, when we talk about neighborhood safety, folks don't trust the police and they don't trust the people who are committing acts of violence. So then you end up with this stalemate where nobody's saying anything because they're concerned about either retribution from the folks committing the acts of violence, or that the police themselves are allowing it to happen. And so really pushing to rebuild those relationships. So, basketball and community activities, and just having police get out of their vehicles and go back to really building relationships helps them, one, understand and be a better investigator if you understand the neighborhood that you're operating in, but two, it rebuilds that trust and relationships relationships that we know we don't have, which is why we're under consent decree by the Department of Justice. And also really pushing for more local hiring. So one of the things that we passed on the Public Safety Committee was to try and unfreeze cadet positions so that we have more young people who have a pathway into the police department that come from Baltimore. And the final part of the plan is to focus on reforms to the police department. We know one big area is trying to have officers who are from the community, in the community, but also making sure that we're pushing for retraining for officers who don't live and aren't from Baltimore, because there's a big distinction when you come into a community that you're not from and you don't understand the culture. And so really pushing for retraining and de-escalation and community mediation and cultural competency, which we know is occurring on the front end when officers are recruits and in training, but also pushing to retrain all of our officers who've been on the force, because there are systemic issues there as well with officers who've been here for a long time and they're kind of set in their ways. And so really pushing for that training piece, pushing for more community-based policing and partnerships with the community and with our young people. So pushing for, you know, basketball programs and recreation programs and any effort to really rebuild trust between communities and the officers, because it's a safety issue, right? If you're afraid of folks who are committing acts of violence on your block and you're afraid to report things for the police, it makes communities unsafe altogether because there's nowhere to go, right? Folks feel trapped. And so really trying to rebuild those relationships so that people do feel like the police represent their interests and are not allowing or perpetuating acts of violence in their communities is a big piece. And the last thing we're really pushing for is unfreezing cadet programs, the cadet program, and we're in funding for that, so that, because there's a gap, right? You graduate high school at 18, but you can't become an officer until you're 21. And so making sure that we have more cadets who are pushed into the police force who are from Baltimore, because I think that makes a huge difference if you come from the city and you understand the dynamics of the neighborhoods. And those are where we want to focus on.
Okay. Let me ask you just quick. The Mayor Catherine Pugh, I like, you know, you mentioned taking a holistic approach, which is not normal, which is, you know, a new approach for Baltimore City. But Mayor Pugh recently did something that was a little holistic too, that was making community college free for Baltimore City residents. Are we seeing City Council and the Mayor work together a little more on this?
We certainly could do more together.
Okay.
I think it was a great plan to do that. I think that was something that is way outside the box. And when we talk about one of the big challenges entering the workforce, for whether you are a young person or you're coming home from incarceration, having an opportunity to get an education, go back to school, whether for free, you know, we don't want the cost to be a barrier, right? If that's the only thing holding you back, then let's remove that barrier so that you can get your associates, you can get your DED, you can get, you know, involved in any kind of academic opportunity that can lead to training and workforce, and entering in the workforce, right? So, because we know these days, like, you need like a master's degree to do an entry-level position, and so so many of our people are left behind, and I think expanding opportunities at BCCC is a good thing.
Kevin, you were a prison psychologist for 22 years.
22 years, yeah.
Tell me about what goes on in the psychology of a person, not just that, you know, may have been violent, but also going to prison, and does locking people up work to prevent crime?
You know, it's a little bit of a complicated answer to that, which I'm going to, you know, in the interest of time here, have to simplify. You know, I don't think, I don't have really anything much good to say about the Maryland prison system.
Why is that?
Well, because it does not really address the needs of, you know, the people who get locked up there. You know, Baltimore City, about 6 of every 10 people who are incarcerated in the Maryland prison system are from Baltimore City. And then, you know, I don't know exactly how it breaks down, but PG and Montgomery counties are, you know, right behind Baltimore City. And so of that 6 of every 10 prisoners that are from Baltimore City, 90% of those are African American from, you know, disadvantaged, you know, economically and socially challenged communities. Same is true for Montgomery and PG County. And 90% of those folks, those African American folks, are involved, are incarcerated for crimes related to the war on drugs, and that runs the gamut from just CDS possession and distribution, armed robberies related to drugs, and then even homicides. It's all
about drugs.
Yeah, part and parcel of the war on drugs. There is treatment, available. It's very piecemeal, and we're talking about a huge number of people. It doesn't happen at the right times in incarceration. It doesn't. It's not. What do I want to say? Evidence-based practice. Right,
there is evidence, but it's not that it's healing anything.
Right. Yeah. And actually, there's been money that has been spent by the department to address these issues, and there's been no follow-up. So they know what works in terms of correctional treatment, but they don't do it. Another aspect is that there's no respect for the culture from which folks come from who get locked up. So even African American clinicians are, in my experience, are so trying to distance themselves from anything ghetto. That it creates a kind of condescension, as it were, at best, and an antagonism towards guys who are in one way, shape, or form trying to get help. So what you end up with really is a city, Baltimore, that bears the brunt, of the war on drugs through a system of incarceration that does little to nothing to address the needs of the people who are locked up. So they come back out, and by and large, they, are in a revolving door. Yeah. So, prison is a traumatizing experience. I think that people have a great deal of difficulty adjusting when they come out. The first 90 days really are, a crucial period for people trying to transition, and there really are no support services. So the transitional aspect of moving from incarceration to reintegration into into the community. There's not much that's being done.
They're not well funded.
Yeah, it's not at all. And I mean, if you talk to if you look on the website, for DOC and the various prisons, they'll talk about having this stuff. They have it, but it's in name only, really, and I forget how many thousand guys there were at JCI, which was the last prison where I worked. They have one social worker. And she was mostly trying to deal with guys who, had some combination of mental illness, physical illness, and substance abuse. So that means that everybody else pretty much is on their own. So
and one person can't even handle all of the caseload that she had.
No, I mean, she was absolutely overwhelmed.
And it's an interesting point because we had the city council yesterday passed a mandatory minimums bill that asked for a mandatory year sentence for anybody possessing an illegal firearm. I've
been very vocal about this. That's a form of violence against the African American community.
A lot of activists have been concerned about this bill because, I mean, as you stated just now, policing locking people up is not working, has not been working. But this was one of the first.
And it's traumatizing.
Yeah, it's traumatizing. It's a form of violence. I mean, I've been, being in the community, coming from prison, and then working in the community for the last 4 or 5 years. I had witnessed people, that, people who are dear to me, being mistreated. And then, I've also been mistreated by the police myself. So, I know it's a paramilitary organization. It's become more so over the course of this war on drugs. It's a form of violence against people.
But it gets support. Bills like that, I think, gets a lot of support because it plays on fear from the general public. I sat in the hearings, and Councilman Burnett, you were very vocal in your opposition to the bill. But I sat in on the hearings, and the first thing that was brought up was like, look, we got a problem with murder in this city, and we got to address it. And this was the first thing, you know what I mean, to come up and address it. Now, it is a weaker bill, in that there was, I think there was some negotiation around the bill. Some council people, voted for it because, it took out things like first-time offenders and things like that. But I want to kind of get a sense from y'all about this bill, what it means going forward, because there are some mandatory minimum bills that are already in place.
Sure. So the amendment that passed with the bill basically mimics the already existing state law. The difference is it adds a $1,000 fine. That isn't in the state law. So when we talk about, and I think that part hasn't gotten enough play in the media because I mean, folks, $1,000 is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. And guess what we're going to do to go get that money?
Right.
It's coming from the family.
Right.
Yeah, it's coming from the family.
Same way bail bonds,
Yes.
and all that. Yeah.
Right. It's problematic. And yeah, I was vocally opposed from the bill upon its introduction, just because we know the history of mandatory minimums and the impact that they've had on the Black community and Black communities all over this country as a part of the war on drugs. And as folks try to make the distinction between drug minimums and gun minimums being somehow different, but it's the same thing. It removes judicial discretion. It takes away context, and it creates a one-size approach to situations that may be different, right? There's 3 reasons people, I would say, and I'm going to oversimplify it, that people carry weapons. They're usually murderers, they're robbing people, or you're protecting yourself from the other 2. Right. And I know it's more complex than that, but in some neighborhoods, you'd be dumb to not have a weapon to protect yourself, right? Some blocks, let's be real about where folks live in the city, and we have a lot of work to do to fix that, but right now we have to look at what people are living in and why you may carry a weapon. In this bill, I think, aside from the fact that it isn't holistic, it doesn't look at public health, it doesn't get to the root causes of violence, which is what I said yesterday before voting no for the bill, was that, I'm happy to continue to work with you guys on things that actually will reduce violence in the city, and this isn't it. But the opposition has tried to play myself and others for being opposed to somehow being for violence or for keeping violent repeat offenders on the street. And it's like, no, like there are people who do need to be incarcerated for killing people. I mean, that's real. But that doesn't mean that I have any less respect or empathy for the families who lost loved ones to violence. Those are 2 separate things. And even in the hearing, there were family members there who were for the bill and were angry that there were folks who, because they see this as a solution. And I was—
Because it's playing on fear.
Right.
It is.
It's their fear. They don't want to see other people murdered, you know what I mean? And so it's being sold, as that. I think it's interesting that I've talked to ex-convicts, who, have said, they've been willing, pushing, trying to get in, and work with criminals, or going in the justice system and work with, people coming home. And they've been blocked, and a lot of that is because, as you know, and we all know, a lot of money goes into locking people up.
Yes.
And I think we see that. But with the ceasefire effort and with the Live to Be More plan, we're seeing a different approach that hasn't been taken, especially, here in Baltimore. But I want to talk about this because this also brings up a lot of fear from people. We saw, in the process, we saw a lot of people going, "This is not going to work. This doesn't make sense. Why are we doing this?" But in the end, we saw, a start, 41 hours as opposed to every 19 hours, somebody being murdered. We saw people coming up and stepping out. We saw mothers of victims of gun violence come and see, a community and support. Can individuals make a difference, even though these problems are so systemic. You know what I mean? I mean, we have a city generally, let's be honest, is not very educated on voting and the political process and all that.
So I mean, to answer your question, you know, just directly, yes. I mean, you know, nobody but individuals really can do this. I mean, look, you have the ceasefire, right? I mean, Erricka, you know, and I guess, you know, with some assistance from some other people, but you know, my understanding from the people that I've talked to, that, you know, was that it was really, you know, Erricka who spearheaded this thing. So, you know, if it hadn't been for an individual, you know, and all the individuals that sort of collected and, you know, around that and made decisions to do, you know, that sort of thing, then, you know, you're nowhere without, you know, those individual constituents, you know, who contribute to this, you know. And, you know, so just one thing that happened with me, and this was like one of the reasons why I wanted to choose a hunger strike, because I felt that it would connect with some people, and then through 6 degrees of separation, it would connect with the people that I wanted to connect with. And indeed, not last Friday, but the Friday before, you know, a guy came down from a real serious drug block where some people have been killed recently, and he told me, listen, I got to tell you, you know, there were some guys up there who left their guns home after they saw you. And he said, man, this white man's out there, you know, doing this for us. You know, we should show him the respect, and we're not taking our guns.
That's powerful.
Yeah,
That's powerful. I mean, you had gang members in groups say
I think what people don't realize what their individual power is, because that is how we are programmed to believe. So we are programmed to believe that we have to accept the conditions in which we are handed. You were born a certain place. This is the place you go to school. This is the place where you live that doesn't have a supermarket near you. Like, whatever all of your conditions are, you just think this is life and this is all I can do. And I really believe that I am fortunate to have been born in a place and in a body that looks broken, because I've had to learn that I am not this physical thing. This physical thing is extremely temporary. I existed before I took this body, and before I was born in Baltimore. I'm going to exist after I leave this body. And so it is up to me what I decide to do with my time in this body. And who will they say we were while we had our chance in this space? And so, because I've had to learn that my body can do a lot more than it looks like it can, that I come from a neighborhood that taught me everything I know, everything that people say, oh, she is so great, she's so inspirational. Normal Court put that in me. In West Baltimore is what put that in me. And I know that, so I know my people. I understand what Baltimore is, but I also know the attempts to beat Baltimore into the ground, to forget what Baltimore actually is. And so the Baltimore ceasefire wasn't my first experience. The only reason I could pull it off with other people is because I had previously done things with my one little voice, where I impacted death penalty repeal in Maryland, where a law got created to put a homicide survivor on the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, because Lisa Gladden, who was vice president of the Senate at the time, watched me move through years of using my voice about the death penalty. And so I watched particularly white legislators in the government try to beat my voice down into the ground in a moment, and they treated no other victims that way. But there was something about my voice that they panicked around and tried to beat into the ground. And it dawned on me, that's what people do to Baltimore. Right? That you see this power, you see this brilliance, you see this talent, you see this strength, and you go harder at removing resources and creating traumatic imagery around it, from the blight of our abandoned homes to the way schools look when you walk into them. Like, you do all of these things that should destroy a people, and for some reason, we are still here. So for me to have a feeling in my chest that goes, I can't go another day without calling Ogun and saying, what did you say about wanting to call a ceasefire 2 years ago? I cannot go another day without calling PFK Boom and saying, yo, you got connections to the streets. Don't you want to use those connections to the streets to call a ceasefire? So it doesn't matter if people think I'm naive, because people don't know what I've already done with my voice. I knew that I wasn't doing anything with my voice that other people couldn't do. I just know that people don't realize that they can, and they didn't know how to. And because I'd been through things that taught me how to, I just said if we all say it together, group consciousness is the reason we're in the predicament that we're in. We believe that violence is power, and so we live in a violent culture in America. So if we shift our perspective about celebrating violence and saying no to violence and healing the reasons we are violent in the first place, and we all put our focus on that, it's going to be amazing what we are able to do together.
Yeah. I think so. I like that this conversation is happening. I like that it's going to continue to happen. I appreciate you all coming on the show specifically because you are three individuals who have taken different approaches, which we need. We all have to hit these problems from different angles. You know, community organizing, personal sacrifice, you know, and of course through policy. So I thank y'all for joining me on this episode and having this discussion.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Real Baltimore on the Real News Network.